this is your girl Wakeji Kamore, and welcome to Reflections by Wakeji Kamore. I hope that you guys are doing well. Happy new week. I hope that you guys have been reading the book of Job, even though I have been quiet a little bit, but I just do hope that you guys have been reading the book of Job and that you have actually finished reading the book. By now, you should have at least finished reading to the last chapter. Today, we are going to be looking at both chapter 38 and chapter 39. I will not be able to read these chapters word for word, but I will give my summary and I will give I'll tell you at least what's happening in the chapter. So if you haven't read the chapter for yourself, the chapters, chapter 38 and 39 for yourself, please take a break, just pause this recording and kindly read the word for yourself. Just read the Bible, the chapters for yourself, understand what's happening in the chapter before you can listen to this thing and the summary that I have for these two chapters. So in these two chapters, we see that God actually comes from and he speaks to Job from the whirlwind. And one of the things that the Lord comes to say is, he says, "Who is this that questions my wisdom with such ignorant words?" Then he tells Job to brace himself like a man because he wanted to ask him some questions and he was expecting Job to answer. But clearly, from just the questions that he continues to ask, we can clearly see that there is no way Job would have answered those questions. So this chapter is after Job, his friends, and then this bystander Elihu had all struggled in vain to explain Job's suffering. But in these chapters 38 and 39, God finally appeared to Job. But he never answered Job's question or explained the reasons as to why Job was suffering. God did not come to say, okay, fine, Elihu was right, or Bildad was right, or Eliphaz was right, or the other guy was right. He just came to be present and to showcase his greatness and his power. So he asked Job a series of questions about creation, and Job could not answer. In chapter 38, we see God asking Job about the foundations of the earth, what really supports the earth, what are the dimensions of the earth, and asking Job, do you know this information? Were you there when I was laying down the foundations of the earth? He asks Job whether he knows the boundaries of the rivers, the lakes, the seas, and the oceans, who tells them how far they can stretch, and where do these waters come from? Like, where do they actually come from? He asks Job whether he can command a morning and where the light comes from and where the darkness goes when morning comes. He also asks Job about the stars, about the clouds that hold water and make it rain, and asks Job whether he can make it rain. And he also asks Job about the lightning, the dew, the ice, and the snow. Basically, in chapter 38, God questions Job about the universe, the making of it, and the things that are in the universe. In chapter 39, God moves from the focus of the universe above and then comes down. It was like, okay, fine. Umeshindwa na hizi maswali za the universe, the stars, the light, the white. Let me come down to your level, to the ground. So the Lord moves from the universe to the animals on earth, something a little bit closer to Job. And he asks whether Job can feed the lioness and whether he can satisfy the appetites of the young lions and whether he can feed the ravens. He asks Job about the childbirth of wild goats, whether he knows how long the gestation period of a wild goat is, whether he knows when they give birth, where they give birth. And the funny thing about wild goats is that the females give birth to at least one or three children, to the three kids. I don't know that to call them kids, other smaller wild goats. You see, the thing is, when a goat gives birth, at least me where I come from, do goats give birth to 2 goats or 3 goats? I think a goat gives birth to 1 goat, right? I think so, if I'm not wrong. The wild goats can give birth to up to 3 children. And the kids are mobile almost immediately. Then the kids just are born like this and they're mobile almost immediately. God asks Job about the freedom of the wild donkeys and the freedom of the wild ox. Just how these two animals cannot be tamed, and even with their strength. As a matter of fact, a wild donkey is stronger than a horse. I mean, can you imagine? But even with this strength, humans cannot put them to work. Like, it's not like an ox, the way we can fungilia the thing that limas and then it will lima for you. A wild donkey and a wild ox, even with their strength, cannot be tamed and they cannot be put to work by human beings. He talks about, he asks Job about the strength of a horse, the soaring of the hawk, and the rising of eagles. And this was just many questions that Job could not answer in these 2 chapters. You see, the thing is, in the previous chapter, we see Job losing his wealth, we see him losing his children, we see him losing the support of his wife, we see him losing his friends because he talks about how his friends are laughing at him, he loses his health, and lastly, we see him lose the sense of God's presence in his life. He's just like, me, I don't feel like God is present. And in these chapters, even though God doesn't necessarily seem to answer the big question in the room, which is, why is Job suffering? Or even come to say who is right between Job and his friends, God comes and starts to restore what Job had lost, which is starting with the sense of God's presence. There are times that we go through such tough times that even though we may never find an answer or an immediate solution to the suffering, the sense of God's presence can be assuring and can offer relief. And so God starts by I feel like God starts by restoring the last thing Job had lost, which is the sense of God's presence in his life. And he's just like, I'm here. And the only thing I can offer at this point is my presence. And the only other thing that God offers other than his presence is just the vastness of his power, so that then Job can be like, okay, fine, if this God is the one who controls the earth, he's the one who controls when it rains, the one who feeds this lioness, he's the one who controls the wild donkey and the wild ox, then for sure he must really know what is going on in my life and that I can trust him. So he offers his presence. And as I'm saying, there are many times that we go through such tough times, and even though we may never find an answer or even an immediate solution to the suffering, the sense of God's presence in our lives can offer such relief. The presence of the Lord can be felt through observing even his majestic creations. There's just something that happens when you stand in front of the Indian Ocean and you're just like, oh my goodness, this thing is so vast. I can't see the end of it. And just the imagination that there's a God that created this. You can be watching a sunset or a sunrise and you can just feel the majestic, glorious, power that the Lord has. The presence of the Lord can also be felt through prayers, and also one of my favorite things to do, which is through worship. You see, the thing is, these questions in these 2 chapters showed that God's thoughts and power and control over everything are beyond our ability to even remotely understand. These questions also show that God is not cold and distant, that he's not a far, far away God who created things and disappeared, that he really still has control over things that he created. Instead, his appearance to Job and the revelations about this creation cement the reason as to why we can trust God. The fact that God is present, whether he's here to answer the questions that we are asking, in our hearts, like whether he comes and explain to us. Sometimes we feel like God owes us an explanation, but sometimes all we need is God's presence and also just a revelation of who he is, how vast his power is, just his creation, and that should be enough to cement the reasons as to why God can be trusted in our times of trouble, in our times of good, in our times of merry and cheery, but mostly that God can be trusted in our times of trouble. And if nothing else, may his presence and may the revelation of just how powerful God is make you trust him even the more. Thank you very much for listening, and see you tomorrow.